Hello, and welcome to this next panel. We have peace and conflict and some lovely panelists here for you, and I hope everyone enjoyed their lunch. So we're gonna get started without any further ado. Our first panelist will be Audrey Thibert from the University of Wisconsin, Madison, and her project is A Shared Uncertainty, Migration Stories from Tunisia. Then we have Elene Chkhaidze from Georgetown in Qatar, and her project is Reconciliation in Cyprus through Religious Peace Building. We also have Lalini Pedris from American University, and her project is Displaced in Bangladesh. We also have Madison Powers, who will be presenting after that, from Elon University, and her project will be On the Border, Latin American Migrants in Limbo. Then we have Beibei Liu and Mayara Teixeira from Columbia University, and their project is After Landing. So, I'm gonna hand it over to Audrey.
Hi everyone, I'm Audrey, and I went to Tunisia for my reporting fellowship, and I mostly was in Tunis, the capital, and Bizerte, which is a northern port city in Tunisia. And so I went there originally to report on migrants from countries in sub-Saharan Africa, but the story sort of changed, as I know many of you guys' stories did as well. So just a little overview. What's happening in Tunisia right now is Tunisia's always served as sort of like this hub of migration due to its proximity to Italy. So it's like kind of right under the like boot of Italy on the Mediterranean Sea. And right now there's a lot of migrants from countries like Nigeria, Chad, Sudan, Ivory Coast, and other countries as well, but those are mainly the migrants that I was talking to. And then also there's a lot of Tunisians that want to go to Italy or other parts of Europe as well. And so this has always sort of been a trend, but it's really increased in the past few years. And from 2014 to 2021, the immigrants from African countries outside the Maghreb, which is like a lot of the countries in northern Africa, it rose by 14,000. And so now there's like an estimate of around 50,000 of these immigrants in Tunisia right now. And so in February, the Tunisian president, Kais Saied, he gave this speech that had a lot of racist undertones and overtones. Like it was pretty just blatantly racist towards these migrants, and so that sort of pushed a lot of the African migrants to want to leave too. And the way they do that is often through like smugglers, or as I'll talk about later, like they'll go in kayaks or sort of makeshift boats, which are both obviously very dangerous. And so. And when I first pitched this story, it was sort of underreported. My TA, my Arabic TA at the University of Wisconsin told me about it, and I thought it was a really interesting story, but by the time I got the grant and throughout the summer, it became more or just reported in general. So I sort of had to like figure out like what to do when a story, an underreported story becomes overreported. And so I decided to sort of look at how individual stories of isolation paint a bigger picture of distress. So I ended up writing three in-depth profiles about 3 different people that I talked to in Tunisia. So this is Marie Jal. She's an Ivorian woman who works in a salon in Tunis. This is Gift. She's a pregnant Nigerian woman who lives in a migrant camp outside the International Organization for Migration in Tunis. And then that is Muhammad Ali, and he's a Tunisian who lives in Bizerte. So I kind of just wanted to talk about each of them really quickly. So Gift, this is a picture of the camp that Gift lives in, and as I said, she's pregnant, and so something that she talks a lot about is, she said she's really scared to give birth in these conditions, and she said there's not access to medical care and equipment, and it's really hard for her to find a job to make money to pay for care. And she originally tried to go through Libya, and she was caught. She was arrested in Libya and brought to Tunis, and she's been there since March. And she says that although she wants to leave, she doesn't really see that happening anytime soon because of the inaccessibility to money, to resources, and to a means to go across the Mediterranean Sea. Marie Jal, like I said, she works at a salon, and she has a really interesting story, but just for the sake of time, I think that I want to touch on something really positive about her story, which is, so this is Reem. She goes to Marie Jal's salon, and she says that she's grown up going to salons like this because in Tunisia, for a lot of Black and mixed Tunisians, they're not taught how to braid their hair and what to do with their hair because the Tunisians, the other more white Arab Tunisians have different types of hair, and so Reem grew up going to these salons and spending hours in these salons with migrant women like Marie Jal, who knew how to do box braids, and because Reem always says, she's like, I have a lot of hair, and so she says that it takes like 5 hours to braid her hair, so she gets to know these women so well. And so I think that's a sort of like a really cool story that, Marie Jal, like, she hasn't quite found her community in Tunisia yet, which I talk about more in the piece, but she's able to kind of give a community to the Black and mixed Tunisians there, which was really cool. And then the last one is Muhammad Ali, and he goes by Dali, and he lives in Bizerte, and his story is really interesting because he is Tunisian, and he decided with a friend last summer to try to go across the Mediterranean Sea, and to do that he went to Tunis, the capital, and bought a blow-up kayak, and they tried to cross, and eventually got picked up by some fishermen who they helped them out, but they were like, if we don't report you guys, like, it's going to look like we're smuggling you. So they brought him and his friend to a Tunisian prison in Tunis for 18 days, and so as he's telling me this, I'm like, oh, it sounds really sad, and so I was like telling him, like, I'm sorry you had to go through that, and he was like, no, like, I'm gonna do it again, like, he this is his way, like, he wants to go across to Italy or Europe so bad that, like, he's gonna do it again. He's gonna keep doing it until it's successful. And so that's just sort of 3 stories. It's not a complete story, with so much nuance. It's hard to capture all of that, but hopefully, I was hoping that it painted sort of a beginning of the story of the migration in Tunisia.
Everybody, my name is Elene Chkhaidze, and I'm from Georgetown University in Qatar. And today I will be presenting on the topic of reconciliation in Cyprus through religious peace building. First of all, before we delve into the reconciliation aspect, let's explore what it is that needs to be reconciled. In 1974, after 20 years of intercommunal violence between Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots, Turkey decided to invade the island, and as a result of the invasion, the island became split in half. Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus is a self-declared republic in the northern part of Cyprus, and it's mostly inhabited by Turkish Cypriots. Whereas when it comes to the southern Cyprus, or as well called Republic of Cyprus, it is majority inhabited by Greek Cypriots. And Greek Cypriots are majority Christians, whereas when it comes to Turkish Cypriots, they're majority Muslim. And while the conflict is by no means a religious conflict, it's purely an ethnic conflict, nevertheless, religion has become a victim of the conflict in two main nuanced ways. Firstly, before the split has occurred, Cyprus was never homogeneous. Like Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots inhabited the whole of an island throughout the centuries. However, this rather arbitrary split, you can see the UN buffer zone in blue in the presentation. This rather arbitrary split resulted in the destruction and endangerment of religious heritage, because you can imagine when one communities are moving to another place, obviously they're leaving behind lots of religious heritage. Some of the churches have been abandoned, looted, some of them vandalized, and the similar situation is occurring with the mosques. And the second issue is with religious freedom, and specifically it is a problem in the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, with only 3 churches operating, and the rest of the churches have to apply for special permits in order to conduct services. So it certainly strips away from religious rights of the communities. And when it comes to reconciliation, reconciliation is a very interesting word. It comes from Latin, and reconciliare means to bring together again. So in case of Cyprus, the attempt to bring Greek Cypriot and Turkish Cypriot communities together has been ongoing since 1974. However, the most major peace plan that almost passed in a referendum has been the Annan Plan in 2004, obviously proposed by Kofi Annan, UN General Secretary at the time. So while 65% of Turkish Cypriots voted in favor of the resolution, the support was much lesser, ranging around 24% for Greek Cypriots. And part of the reason why this can be explained is because Greek Cypriots on average tend to be more religious than Turkish counterparts, Turkish Cypriot counterparts, and Greek Cypriots did not really feel represented in this peace plan because it was mostly led by the left. So it didn't give any voice to religious communities when drafting this peace resolution. But when it comes to reconciliation, it is important to take into account all sorts of communities that are represented in the island. And Talpi Eskidijan, she's the founder of one of the non-governmental organizations I had a chance to interview, Religious Track of the Cyprus Peace Process. She noted very effectively, peace agreement is like a glass tower, and anyone left out is like a small pebble capable of cracking it. And it was certainly true in case of Cyprus. So Salpi, she decided to found this religious track of the Cyprus peace process in order to establish inter-religious dialogue among various religious leaders on the island. Obviously, it involves majority religions like Greek Cypriot Archbishop and Turkish Cypriot Imam, but as well it also includes minority religions on the island, which is Maronite, Latin, and Armenian Apostolic churches. And while it's obviously the meeting of religious leaders, nevertheless, the whole framework is rooted in human rights and international law. So you can see religious leaders advocating for the rights of you can see Archbishop, Greek Cypriot Archbishop advocating for the rights of Turkish Cypriots, and you can see Turkish Cypriot Imam advocating for the rights of Greek Cypriots, which is a very important transformation, as it brings acknowledgement of mutual trust and like mutual grieving that has been caused by the conflict. And as a result, religious track managed to bring that, in a way, marginalized voice that was absent from the Annan Plan in peace process. And also it's important to note that religion can serve as a very powerful force for healing and reconciliation, since most of the Abrahamic religions, they have love, forgiveness, and peace as their basis. And especially when it comes to Greek Cypriot community, religious institutions are seen as trusted mediators and peace builders. So as a result, the communities are more likely to respond to their appeals rather than to respond to the appeals of politicians per se. The second non-governmental organization I had a chance to interview is Technical Committee on Cultural Heritage, and as the name stands, it concerns itself with the restoration of cultural heritage, and under that umbrella, it's religious heritage as well. You can see, these are the pictures taken by me on the right-hand side. On top, it's Andreas Apostolos Church in northern part of Cyprus inhabited by Turkish Cypriots, and below we see Hala Sultan Teke Mosque, which is in the Greek side of the island. And technical committee has worked on the restoration of both of these religious heritage. And these are very important because they carry lots of importance. For instance, Hala Sultan Teke Mosque is considered fourth most holy place for Muslims, and similarly Apostolos Andreas Monastery is considered like the most important heritage on Cyprus. And one interesting part about technical committee, it does not simply deal with the restoration, but also how it does the restoration also matters. So it brings Turkish Cypriots and Greek Cypriots together, and they're working together on the mutual restoration of shared heritage. So it's not uncommon to see Turkish Cypriots advocating for the restoration of churches in Greek side of Cyprus, and to see the similar thing happening with Greek Cypriots advocating for restoration of mosques in Republic of Cyprus. So like the main takeaways I want you all to get from this is that trust and peace ground should already exist for reconciliation. And it is essentially reconciliation, that bringing of both communities together, that gives birth to a peace agreement, not vice versa. So in case of the Annan Plan, unfortunately the opposite has happened, and there was no ground-up approach to peace building. It was rather imposed from top. And as a result, I do genuinely believe that even though it might not be as significant, but the tireless efforts of non-governmental organizations, such as Religious Track of the Cyprus Peace Process and Technical Committee on Cultural Heritage, can certainly bring Cypriot society closer to reconciliation. Thank you all so much.
My name's Lalini Pedris, and I'm with American University. I recently graduated this past summer. So the project I'm focusing on is Displaced in Bangladesh, and I'm going to Bangladesh in December, so I haven't yet done my project, and I'm focusing on pre-reporting. So human-elephant conflict is really at the heart of my project, and it arises from the different types of displacement that is taking place in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh, which is on the Bay of Bengal in the southeastern portion of Bangladesh near the Myanmar border. And so it's also home to local Bangladeshi communities who have been there for generations, as well as an influx of over 1 million Rohingya refugees who have arrived there over decades, but most recently in 2017, there was an influx of over 700,000 Rohingya refugees who were persecuted and experiencing genocide in Myanmar. And the Bangladeshi and Myanmar governments have kind of been pushing people back and forth across the border. And then you have local wildlife populations as well, who have also been displaced. So I'm first going to talk a bit about my own, let's see, I'm pressing the arrow. Okay, here we go. My own kind of experience in human-elephant conflict. So it's going to take a second. Come on. Okay, so in 2016, my family is originally from Sri Lanka, and I've been there several times. In 2016, I actually went as part of my first graduate program that I was working on to the central dry zone of Sri Lanka, and I was evaluating a project with the Sri Lanka Wildlife Conservation Society, and it was focused on human-elephant conflict and agricultural development in the central dry zone. So this is just what it looked like. And my job was basically to evaluate the program and to see how the citrus plants that were provided to farmers in the area were helping to sustain a supplemental income, as well as to provide buffer crops for elephants that were coming into villages and agricultural fields, and that was causing a lot of conflict. So when I was there doing field work. I wasn't reporting as a journalist. So I was working on like biological assessments and monitoring and tracking elephants that were coming into the corridor. Sorry if I'm like going in and out. So that was the kind of work that I was doing, and I was able to see how the NGOs on the ground were working with local communities. The problem was that what I saw kind of on the website before I started my internship, it looked like a really successful project, and then when I got there on the ground, I realized how much was lacking. The crops that were being grown weren't actually providing a buffer zone at all. They weren't hardly growing, so that was something I wanted to keep in mind for this project in Bangladesh. Like, pre-reporting, obviously, as everyone knows here, is very different from what you see when you get on the ground. Sorry, I don't know why this is taking long. So this is what else I did in Sri Lanka. I'm just gonna breeze through this because obviously it's not the main aspect of my project. But you can see agricultural fields, a dump site that elephants also come to raid, and then elephants from Vascoma National Park. A big problem is that the agricultural fields and villages are surrounded by wilderness area, and so there's a lot of conflict between elephants and people. And so in Bangladesh, something that I wanted to focus on was not just this conflict. You have the similar, pattern of agricultural and forested area and human development being surrounded by wildlife sanctuaries like Teknaf Wildlife Sanctuary, Wildlife Refuge. And then this is also by the Myanmar border, and a lot of elephants, generationally, they follow the same migration routes. So they travel back and forth between Bangladesh and Myanmar. So with the development of the Rohingya camps, the problem that arose is that there was a lot of environmental degradation, and the camps were actually blocking this migration corridor for the elephants. And so there's a lot of conflict that comes into that happens when the elephants are literally trying to migrate, or they kind of trample over infrastructure and get into the camps, and there's violence on both sides that ends up happening. And then you also have a conflict between the local Bangladeshis who have been in Cox's Bazar for a very long time, and then there's only like tens of thousands of them, and then there's over 1 million Rohingya refugees that have come into the area. And they share a lot of like cultural and religious aspects of their identities, but they are different groups and they tend to have different needs. And a conflict that's arisen is that local Bangladeshis feel like their needs and their support isn't as greatly taken into account by the government and by the United Nations. So a lot of humanitarian support that's going to the Rohingyas is seen by local Bangladeshis as like they're being neglected from this support, and they're facing poverty. So that's another level of conflict here between these three groups. And so on the left you see Rohingya refugees. On the right you see a local Bangladeshi family who's been living in Cox's Bazar. And here's an example of critically endangered Bangladeshi elephants. And so in addition to these kind of human-elephant conflicts, and something that's also giving rise to it is the degradation of the environment and the habitat loss, loss of resources, and kind of competition over resources. So one thing is that when the Rohingya camps were created, they had to raise a lot of forested land in order to create the camps. A lot of wood was used for construction and for fuel for cooking, and still is. And so it destroyed a lot of forests. And of course, the Rohingya people really needed these resources. But it took away resources from the local Bangladeshis, and then it destroyed habitat and resources for elephants. And then cattle grazing as well, cattle herding that the Rohingya people, some of them practice, also requires land that is deforested. And you can also see how some of the camps are like sprawling. There's obviously they were set up very quickly, so there wasn't a lot of like planned development. It's kind of just sprawl, and that is also affecting the environment a lot. So some of the challenges that I think I will face doing this project are language barriers, and also access to the Rohingya camps, access to the local Bangladeshi community. I don't speak Bengali, I don't speak Rohingya, and so those were two issues that I was concerned with. And that's where Ritan Kia, who's right here, he's a local journalist, a Bangladeshi journalist who lives part-time in New York, lives part-time in Dhaka, and he speaks Bengali and has links to, or has access to the Bangladeshi Forest Department and the RRRC, which is who kind of mediates access to the Rohingya camps. And because he's kind of done work with them before, and he's done a lot of his own documentary work, and then working with foreign outlets like The Guardian, BBC, Al Jazeera. So he's very well versed in how things work there. And I reached out to him doing a foreign correspondence project for a class last semester, and that's kind of how I got linked to him. And he also knows someone who speaks Rohingya, who has also done reporting before. So hopefully that will ease some of the challenges that I'll find in this project. And finally, what I'd like to focus on, I recognize that things are going to be very different on the ground, so I'm trying to consider different angles and different focuses. But what I really want to focus on are the challenges faced by these three communities that are experiencing different types of displacement, whether that's displacement by the Rohingya community for local Bangladeshis, displacement of like migratory routes and resources for the elephants, and then the physical displacement of Rohingya communities from their homelands across the border. And some of these challenges are represented by as you can see, this is the cyclone that hit recently. You have gang violence within the Rohingya refugee camps. There was recently a fire this year that, like a purposeful fire that was created during gang violence that burned a lot of people's homes. Even some of the human-elephant conflict solutions that are out there, such as on the bottom right. Sorry for the photo, but this elephant was killed by an electric fence. And so it shows that even the solutions that have been brought about have been, in many cases, detrimental. And then there's a few ways that communities are being assisted in dealing with the human-elephant conflict. They have elephant task forces set up near the Rohingya camps with watchtowers for monitoring, and they have set up these like dummy elephants to kind of do demonstrations with and stuff. But this problem is continuing, and so I'd like to go and see what's happening on the ground right now. It's an underreported issue, not so much in Bangladesh, but in the Rohingya area in the Cox's Bazar district. So sorry if I spoke too long, but it was a lot to get through. So thanks.
Hi everyone, I'm Madison Powers. I'm from Elon University, and this year for my reporting fellowship, I traveled to El Paso, Texas to report on migrants crossing the US-Mexico border. So I was there in late May, about 2 weeks after Title 42 was lifted, which if you don't know what that is, there's a Trump-era migration policy that enabled the US to turn away migrants and deny asylum for what was supposedly health-related reasons. But the thing about Title 42 is that there was no real criminal penalization for crossing illegally. So if you crossed and were caught and were deported, you could continue to try to come in. So Title 42 was extended a couple times under Biden and then eventually expired in mid-May, and I was there around May 21st. And it reverted to Title 8, which is a decades-old policy that makes it more difficult for people to cross illegally, and it's meant to have sort of more like legal pathways that aren't entirely feasible, like flying in, which is often not financially feasible. And it also makes it difficult for people if they cross illegally and are caught and deported, they can't return for 5 years under threat of criminal penalization. So for a little bit of background, I was in El Paso, which is right here, and the route that many of the people I interviewed took, most of them were from Venezuela. So they went through Venezuela, Colombia, and then went to the Darien Gap, which is called the jungle. And so that is the roadless, like ungoverned, very dangerous, like 3-day plus journey where people are subject to heavy rainfall and floods and robberies, and it's incredibly dangerous. And then people take buses or trains or walk through the rest of Central America, and then eventually often take a freight train, a cargo train, throughout Mexico that ends in Juarez, which is on the other side of the Rio Grande in Mexico. So I am going to focus a little bit today on the story of this woman, Maria Jose, who is from Venezuela, and her son, Cristian, and her niece, Isabella. So she traveled with her sister and her husband, and when they got to Juarez and were ready to cross, they had originally wanted to do a CBP1 appointment, which was originally used for freight and cargo. It's an app, and migrants can make appointments through it to request asylum and to be processed. And it was inundated. It was just inundated with applications during the whole Title 42 debacle. And she ended up not being able to make an appointment, so she turned herself in at the border. And she crossed under Title 8. So she was able to cross, as was her sister and her son and her niece. But her husband was, he was processed under expedited removal and returned to Juarez. And so she was in El Paso staying at Sacred Heart Catholic Church and Shelter, which is in downtown El Paso, very easily accessible from the border after people are in the US. And she was just in this perpetual state of waiting to hear from her husband, and she was in constant communication with him. He was trying to find an appointment because he wanted to be able to cross legally so that he could reconnect with her, so they could eventually go to Pennsylvania where her brother-in-law lives. And so the biggest thing that I took away from her was this balance of fear and hope. She was fearful because she was alone, because she didn't have her husband with her, but she was hopeful because she thought that eventually he would be able to make it into the US and they could travel together and reunite their family. She shared with me the mental stress of traveling with children. It's the subject of my field note, which is on the Pulitzer site. And she just said it's difficult being able to balance the having to be a brave face for her kids while also being vulnerable to the fact that she was in a new country where she didn't have many connections. And she talked about how her kids didn't understand what they were going through. I talked a little bit to her son, and he said the journey was difficult, and his least favorite part was the jungle and the train, just because of how cold it was. But she just shared with me this sense of exhaustion, that she was weary and she didn't really know what her next steps were. And that was the biggest thing that I took away from interviewing migrants in El Paso, was how precarious a position it is to be a migrant, documented or undocumented, in the US, because I think that what a lot of media covers and what a lot of we think of when we think of the migrant journey is the difficulties of the journey outside of the US, not necessarily inside. But the fact of the matter that many of them shared with me is that the journey doesn't get easier once you cross. There are asylum appointments and you have to be processed, and it's an ongoing thing. And even when you've been granted asylum or you've been granted an appointment, there's still a level of uncertainty and a level of fear, even living in the US, because you still have to find work and you still have to be able to support your family. And so the biggest takeaway of this project that I hope I can impart on you all is the pervasion of hope in spite of the challenges and in spite of the instability. What I was so struck by in talking to people was how gracious they were, because they were sharing some of their most difficult and really heartbreaking stories. And even people who declined to speak with me just were so gracious about it and were so respectful and were really hopeful. And I think that that's what I'm most passionate about when speaking about immigration, migration is that everyone is human, and it's easy to look at some statistics from the border and look at how many people crossed in the days leading up to Title 42. But when speaking to people who actually had been through it, it's just a different perspective. And I hope that all of you are able to take just a piece of that away from this. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Beibei, and standing next to me is my incredible partner during this journey. And today we want to share the documentary project we've been working on for the past year. It's called After Landing. So since April 2022, there are more than 160,000 migrants have arrived in New York City, and most of them crossed the very dangerous Darien Gap to the US and try to pursue what they thought would be a better life here. And in our film, we're trying to make a metaphor by comparing them to the migrating birds, because they're like constantly moving and trying to escape from the hostile weather, just like migrating birds for a better living condition. And but after landing, do they really find a better life here? And this is a question our film wants to explore. So as we all know, there are some Republican governors that send the migrants from the border to the Democratic brown states, just like New York City, Washington, D.C., California. But many of the cities, they have reached their capacity to receive the migrants, including New York City, which is so-called the sanctuary city, and it's just ending the right to shelter law right now. And the dilemma has really amplified the long-time humanitarian crisis at the border.
So we were trying to portray one of the worst crises New York has faced in the past few years. And our challenge was how to do that, but still make people be moved by the story and feel empathy by what they were seeing on the screen. So we had to create a strategy to do that, and we decided to zoom in exactly like a camera does when you're trying to show something, like you're trying to film chaos and crisis. So you zoom in to see people's faces. That's what we tried to do, choosing one story to try to tell the whole picture, the whole story. And that's how we met Yaxabel Lopez and Jorge Ojeda. They are a couple. They've been married for the past 4 years. They left Venezuela. They left the children behind, crossed the Darien Gap that Madison was talking about. They arrived in Texas, and then they were separated and bused, and they didn't know where they were going to. And to show a little bit of their struggle, we prepared a trailer to show you today.
Partimos de Venezuela en septiembre de 2022. La desesperación nos hizo salir. Nosotros duramos 7 días en la selva. 7 intensos días en la selva. Porque desde que yo entré a la selva hasta que salí, hubo olor a muerto.
Nos la dejaron sin culero, sin comida, sin nada. Para que vean lo que es la selva, para ver. Un niño no se puede venir aquí.
Y era algo como que yo no quería hacer. Y no me quise como despedir, pues, o sea, yo le dije a él que ya nos veíamos y eso, entonces...
Yo, mami.
Están difíciles. Están un poco difíciles.
Entonces que ella todo el tiempo se molesta, a ella no le gusta perder.
Pero es que a él no me importa lo que a mí me pasa entonces.
No.
¿No te importa?
Es que a ti tampoco te importa lo que a mí me pase. A ti tampoco te importa lo que a mí me pase. No.
Si él se sigue cerrando y él se sigue enfocando en ver un enemigo en mí, no no vamos a llegar a ningún lado. Bueno, los planes son, bueno, volver a emigrar, emigrar por esta vez a Canadá.
A Canadá. Me pregunto yo mismo, ¿qué hice yo de locura esta vez?
Yo también te amo un montón.
Aquí mami, a Jorge y mi abuelita, y a mi abuelita y mi tío, a tu retico también.
Está bien.
Está bien, hijo, está bien.
Ya nosotros te amamos mucho, ¿viste? Un montón.
So Isabel and Jorge, they're lucky in some way because they survived the jungle, they made their way into US, and they were lucky enough to find a lawyer who do the pro bono case on their case. And the presence of camera might help reshape some of the realities of their life. But today, what we want to share is that not many migrants are as lucky as they are. The reality is that many migrants, they don't have job and they don't have income because they need to have the work permit, but that is only allowed after you file the asylum case. But to file the asylum case, you need to hire a lawyer, which might cost thousands of dollars. But if they don't have a job, how would they be able to afford it? So the system right now, either in New York City or across the US, is very overwhelmed. And the lawyers also, they cannot take every migrant case as pro bono. So everything in the reality makes it really hard for migrants to live independently in the US, which in return put more financial burdens to the cities as well. And now the Biden administration is going to resume the deportation of Venezuelans, and that will leave many migrants' lives hanging in the balance. So beneath the luck of Isabel and Jorge is a more commonly disappointing and complicated reality for many migrants.
We knew from the very first beginning of this project that we wanted to do a long-term follow-up with them because we wanted to show some sort of transformation. And I think for me, Alice, being a documentarist is not just being the first camera that arrives in a crisis, but also being the last one that leaves. I want to be there and see the consequences. I really want to listen and see people. So that was our goal, and we had almost a year-long relationship with them. But that is amazing, but also brought a lot of challenges. We can talk about that in the Q&A if you're more interested in that. But so many times we had to make hard decisions, tough choices, because we absolutely became friends with them. We care about them. We are engaged in their lives and their problems. But at the same time, we are journalists, and if we had done some things, maybe we'd not be able to portray their real struggle. So if you guys are interested, we can talk more about that later. Thank you.
Hello? Ooh, okay. All right, good job, you guys. Is this working? Can you hear me? Okay. Cool, thank you, Anne. Yeah, so good job. Let's give it up one more time for our peace and conflict panelists. All right, so as we've been doing in the other panels, I will first open it up to you guys if you have questions for each other about someone else's presentation or something else you saw. Yes.
Madison, because our project is some sort of continuation of yours, and I was wondering if you could get in touch with them and see what happened after they landed.
Yeah. So I did not follow up with Maria Jose, but I did actually follow pretty closely the main characters of my like full story, my full project, and I ended up keeping in touch with one guy on Instagram, and I've like been able to update my story throughout, which is nice. But he first went in El Paso and then flew to Denver, Colorado, and they were there for about a week, and then now he's in New York and has a job. So that has been very cool to follow. Yeah, I actually have a question for Mayara and Beibei. So can you talk a little bit about balancing the friendship with the journalistic roles that we have and like our obligation not to get too close to sources?
That actually has been really challenging for us, especially when they're in such a vulnerable situation. A lot of time we have the privilege to be there and, filming the moments, important moments in their life. But I also remember there's a scene where their daughter was sick back in Venezuela, and they're desperately seeking money to help their daughter. And I think their daughter has a kidney problem, and so it's very urgent. And I think Mayara was at that day was with them. And I think Jorge wanted to ask some help from Mayara. And that's a moment I think it's really hard to decide, because we cannot, as a journalist, we cannot directly give like financial support to them. But on the other hand, we're all human beings and we want to help them. So I think Mayara was doing a really good job because even though we didn't like directly give the money to them, but we suggest some, nonprofit organization that probably gonna help them. But at the end of the day, they still need to figure out the problem by themselves. So I would say it's always been challenging to balance this kind of friendship and professional relationship between us.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. Yeah, it was hard. It was very hard because I really like them. It's been a year. But if we kept solving their problems, then how could we portray what's happening with everyone? That's the whole point of that. Like, they are representative of so many people, and we tried very hard to do our best to connect them with nonprofits. Like in that specific situation, at the end, they called up a nonprofit. The nonprofit said, okay, we can send you the money, but we need a Venmo. And then, of course, they didn't have a Venmo, but I did. So that was the point that I said, okay, that I can help. I couldn't do more than that. But I think it's subjective. That was my choice, my decision, but maybe someone would do differently.
Yeah.
So my question is pretty much to all the panelists, since most of you focused on migration. I wonder, when you are following the storyline of specific persons, how did you manage to get access to them? Because it's pretty much a situation, like in my case, it was non-governmental organizations, so it was pretty straightforward to reach out to them. But when it comes to reaching out and finding specific individuals who are also willing to collaborate, like, would any of you like to expand on your journey and luck and some challenges?
So all of the migrants that I interviewed were outside of shelters in El Paso. So I didn't go into any of them. And then I also interviewed some nonprofits that house migrants, but I did not interview anyone inside just because of privacy issues. But a lot of people said no, and they were nice about it. So I would say, like, I think I ended up interviewing 10 or 11 migrants, and I probably asked 50. So just outside of shelters, I would ask. And there were certain places that are sort of well-known hubs in El Paso for migrants to just be after they cross.
In our case, I was going to Port Authority every day. We had classes every day, but sometimes I went before class, sometimes after class, every day for 1 month. And then at some point, a volunteer, we connected, and he said, well, there's a couple here that just got to New York. They've been separated in the border. Don't you want to meet them? And then when I met them, they were so desperate to tell their story. I have the first recording in my phone. It's an audio recording, and it's 45 minutes of non-stop talking and I didn't ask any question. Like I just asked, "Hi, what's your name?" And then they really wanted to share what was happening, all the crossing and all their struggle. So that's how we chose them, because we knew that it could be positive for them. It could be a therapeutical process for them to talk about what they've been through. I don't know about
Yeah, so kind of like Madison, the way that I like met at least GIFT was just going outside the International Organization for Migration, because that's where a lot of the migrants are, as you saw, like in the camps. They're living there. The other people that I met was kind of just going there and word of mouth. There's a really strong youth community in Tunisia. They all just know each other and are really willing to talk. Something that came up was anonymity. I think everyone kind of wanted to talk about that, and there's a couple cases where it was only first name, but everyone wanted to talk about it, especially Muhammad Ali and Marie-Jal as well. And Marie-Jal I met through Reem, which was a pre-reporting contact. So yeah.
All right. So now, Jackie, yes. And then you guys can start thinking about if you have any other questions.
Sorry, I'm having a hard time standing up. I'm Jackie from the University of Richmond, and I wanted to thank Mayara and Beibei for producing such a beautiful trailer. I can't wait to see the whole thing. And I really appreciated how you showed the difficultness in the relationship that the couple had, especially the part where the woman was talking about how sometimes she felt that he was thinking of her as an enemy. So I really appreciated showing that conflict that arises within a family in the situation of immigrating somewhere. So how did you handle those instances where they were going through relationship problems?
Yeah, so I would say at the very first beginning, we didn't explore a lot of their issues between them. We're just be there and filming and make sure we got the whole scene, and just to be there with her in every moment. But after a few months, we got a ton of footage, and because we were doing a documentary, and we want to have we want to find out what is the story structure and what is the thing that everyone can resonate with. So we don't want the audience think they're just migrants. They're not, it has nothing to do with me. We think it's we want to show their emotional journey throughout this journey. So then we separate them as two characters, and Isabel, she is our protagonist because I think she has a stronger expression and emotion, especially when we ask question about her son back in Venezuela, her separation from the family. And she's also becoming more independent when she is making more money and having a job, while Jorge is kind of doing the day job and didn't make that much money. So the conflicts suddenly rise between them. Yeah, I think it's just as the story unfolding, we're trying to find more personal side of the story, not just about migration, but about two person, their experience a really hard time in their life and their changing relationship during this process.
All right. Oh, Layla, I'm coming to you. Oh, okay. Here.
Okay, hi everybody. I really love this panel. It made me so emotional. And I guess I just want to ask everybody, how do you deal with this journalistic principle that you have to leave things how you found them? It sort of goes against being a human, I think. We all know that story about the photographer who sees the dying child in Africa and just had to leave him. But it's how do you do that, and how do you emotionally compartmentalize and not beat yourself over that? I know we spoke about it last night, but I just can't imagine, having to leave them behind and not give them money for their daughter's kidney? Like, how do you even have that conversation? Sorry.
Yeah, that was a hard one. I think in that specific situation, what I thought is that if I give them the money, then they will not have the tools to solve the next problem. But if I give them the tools and the connections, maybe they are going to be more independent in the process of settling up in New York. So I definitely did something, but I tried my best not to just simply solve it, because then I would not be able to film their struggle, which was very important for us. But this is very hard. I don't know. Like sometimes I think we made the wrong choice. There are many moments, and we had a lot of discussions, a lot of ethical dilemmas. There were some moments that we crossed the line, one way or another. But we learned so much. I never been able to do a year-long follow-up with someone, and that brings a lot of connection, that brings a lot of engagement. And yeah, we made some mistakes in the way, but I think we learned a lot, and we set up our own boundaries. I think each one of us is going to find out along the way what's your own boundary when you separate things.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's not easy, and especially when we're talking about such like fraught issues, it's not going to be easy to cover it. But I think for me, the thing that I remind myself of is the best way that I can make a difference and shed light on the issue is by reporting on it and by doing what I'm doing, and separating myself from the subject, like obviously still respecting their humanity and seeing them as human beings, but knowing that like my role is not as an NGO or a volunteer, but as a reporter first.
Yeah, so I obviously haven't done my reporting project yet, but this is something I'm actually struggling with a lot, just thinking about preparing for this. I think I am, I'm someone who wants to, focus a lot on conflict. And for me, I don't know, it's just really daunting, the idea of like witnessing conflict and being able to do something. But, there's so much going on and so many people that need assistance, and it's like you can't get involved. I know my first reporting project ever when I was in grad school was like reporting at a humane society, and I went home with like my sister's dog. So like I struggle pretty much every story, like not getting involved. But yeah, I think with part of what might be difficult for me, and maybe it'll help a little, I think for me is the language barrier, and also the fact that I'm only there for 3 weeks, and I'm actually having the opposite problem. Like, how am I going to, connect with people with whom I don't speak the language, despite having a translator who's sort of integrated into the community at some level, and like, how am I going to learn their stories and not just be a parachute journalist? Like, I'm not, because of work and like my pets, I'm not able to stay longer, and so that is like a big concern for me. Like, how am I going to tell the human story and not like just kind of not really know it?
For me, I think follow-up reporting is really important, and even if it's not, like under a Pulitzer grant, I think like keeping in contact with the sources is really important, and just kind of following up on that and like seeing, where your stories go and where there's opportunity to do that follow-up. Like hearing feedback is really important too. I know Marie Jal, like one of the people I talked to, like someone read. This wasn't the goal of my story, but someone read her story or the story about her, and like, she's was a new customer. Like she got a new customer from it, and so like just kind of seeing like hearing that was really cool. So just like keeping in contact with like the people in the story or other sources, and like keeping in mind opportunities for follow up is kind of how I think about it too.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Essie from UW Madison, and I have a question about the documentary. I'm kind of afraid to ask it, but I also need to know the piece of footage with the baby that was abandoned. I guess my question is, can you provide any context? Because I found that horrifying. And I'm guessing you didn't take that footage yourself. And then a question for you that I also want to pose to everyone else is, how do you decide how far to go with what you're presenting, like especially photojournalism or documentaries, but even just in writing, like awful things are happening around the world all the time. So where's the line between this thing happened and being vague about it, like people died, and versus like describing in gory detail what's happening? How do you go about making those kinds of decisions?
This trailer is not a finished up trailer. We are doing the post-production, so many of the faces in the Darien Gap would be blurred, and we are going to respect the privacy. This is obviously not our filming, but that is specific video we chose because many times Yexabel felt guilty by leaving her son behind. And many people ask her, how could you do that? So we really wanted to show that there's no easy choice in there. Like choosing to bring your baby might be very dangerous for him. So that's why we kept that specific piece about the Darien, just because that's something that she explored a little bit with us. But and we have a disclaimer in the whole film that this is not us filming. This is footage from migrants that cross the Darien Gap. They publish it in YouTube. Everything is in YouTube. But of course, we'll have blurred faces and try to respect their privacy. But even though I think that's very important to justify the decision that she made.
To that larger question, in terms of like deciding what to incorporate or not, I think that's especially difficult for some of our stories that are about a lot of conflict-ridden issues. I think that it kind of comes down to your individual and I guess your editor's judgment about what is too graphic, because you want to paint a picture that's specific enough that people who have no idea about the issue can understand what's going on, but you don't want it to be exploitative or traumatic to read. So I think that kind of comes down to when you're in post-production or when you're writing, and I think it's probably a little bit different visually versus the written word, because you can take a step back from it when it's on paper, but just looking at how can you get your message across most effectively without it being overwhelming for people, because you still want people to read it.
I guess I'll give an example from, I'm a freelancer right now. I just started about a month ago with Al Jazeera, and we work on a show called Upfront, which is like a foreign affairs weekly show. And we were doing this week's episode on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And there was this huge question of something that was it's still currently uncorroborated, but there were a lot of reports of like, sorry, this is graphic, but like decapitated babies, and like whether Hamas had actually done this in Kfar Aza, which is like a kibbutz near the border of Gaza. And we were trying to figure this out because we actually were interviewing both like a former foreign minister for Israel and then a spokesperson for Hamas, like in two different segments. And that issue came up on both ends. And trying to corroborate this, because I'm a researcher for the show, was really hard because there's so much fake news out there, and so sometimes it's like, how far do you have to go to convince people that something is not or is happening? Like for me, I was actively looking for footage of this, despite how horrible it sounds, just to try and corroborate this so that we could answer, like, it's a pretty contentious show because it's focused more on like accountability, and so you have to get it right. And for me, there's always this question to journalists of like whether something is sensationalized or something's necessary, especially if it's graphic and sensitive. And I think it depends on like, what your goal is. If you feel like people aren't taking something seriously enough and that showing something, in this case it was uncorroborated, but if you're working on something else, like school shootings, for example. There are a lot of questions as like whether you show, blood and like whether you show like bloody clothes or whether you show the children themselves. Like, if it's going to be sensationalized, that's not the best way. But if people aren't taking it seriously, it's like, how far do you have to go to get that message spread? So I really think it comes down to like what your goal is, and I think that helps determine like how far you're willing to go.
Okay, so my answer is going to be a bit different because most of you reported about what's happening like when the conflict is right in the middle of unfolding, whereas my reporting is more about what happens after the conflict. And in this case, I actually had this challenge because part of my reporting involves documenting the destroyed religious heritage. So it's a photojournalistic project as well, right? So I had this dilemma where I wanted to present the already destroyed religious heritage while at the same time also documented what has been done in order to address this issue. And in the beginning, my main focus was on the destruction of religious heritage. But as I progressed and as I started writing the story, I realized that the main message I wanted to report on was not about what has happened in the past, but rather it was more forward-looking. So right now, I'm still in the development of writing that story, but pretty much I've decided to incorporate to a larger extent what has been done in order to achieve reconciliation rather than pitch and like make my story focused on the trauma, which is certainly existing. Nobody can deny that, but it's just way too much reporting about like messages of desperation, which is obviously super important and human suffering, but I hope to bring a message of hope in my reporting, so I have decided to focus more on positive aspects and on reconciliatory aspects.
All right. We might have time for a very fast question, a very quick question. If Grace has one, yes. Here you go.
Hi, I'm Grace. I'm part of the Pulitzer Center team. I've got a question about the Cyprus Reconciliation Project. I was wondering because I think normally in the news we hear about religion as more of a dividing line than something that unites people. And so I'm wondering how in this case religious leaders were able to use this in a reconciliation process. And is this like a unique situation to Cyprus, or do you think that that's a strategy that can be used elsewhere as well?
That's an excellent question. And actually, I was discussing in the morning today how like South African example stands as a great demonstration of how religious peace building is not solely limited to Cyprus. So Desmond Tutu was actually one of the main figures in facilitating the reconciliation. And even though I 100% agree that most of the time religion is portrayed, unfortunately, as a destructive force that divides across the ethnic lines, that divides across religions lines, I feel like we don't really do justice to religious peace building because we have this preconceived notion that all religious communities tend to be so like orthodox, they tend to be so conservative. But yes, so it's certainly nuanced, but I would say I'm glad I reported on like rather positive aspect of it. And yeah.
Great, thank you. All right, just a few reminders before we take a quick break before our last panel. First, if you can all clean up the garbage that's on your tables and just transport it to a trash bin over there, that would be excellent. There's also more food and snacks and drinks that you can help yourself to, please, because like it's for you guys. Please use it. Please eat it, drink it. That's really helpful. And then also, just a reminder, we have that hashtag. You can use it, you can follow it, you should check it out because a lot of you have been posted as well. And so you can see yourselves on social media. And that's fun too. So thank you guys, and it's time for break now.